For our listeners and viewers at home, my name is Leo Braceno. I'm the Digital Engagement Manager here at the American Legislative Exchange Council, and this is my colleague and friend, Joe Trotter, who is the Task Force Director of our Energy, Agriculture, and Environment Task Force. And we're joined today by a very, very special guest, John Norris, who is the author of Hidden War. John, we have a lot to talk about and a lot to cover here. But yeah, there it is. Yeah,
there it is.
Is there a hidden war? How hidden is it, and where is it being fought?
Yeah, so guys, a backstory on the whole hidden war concept. It goes back to really game wardens getting involved in having to fight the drug cartels, which was, sounds kind of oxymoronic. The question has been over the last 15, 20 years of what are game wardens doing in a drug war? What are they doing going on drug cases? And, when we started to assist the sheriff's offices throughout the state of California back in like 2004 or 2005, it was really uncommon, unconventional for us to be involved in those operations. But what people didn't realize, it's got nothing to do with drugs. It's got nothing to do with cannabis even. It's not a demonization of cannabis regulated properly, if it is going to be regulated properly. It's really a demonization on a threat to American public safety, not only in California, but throughout our entire great nation, and also environmental crime. The bottom line is the drug cartels out of Mexico have absolutely wreaked havoc throughout the California forest and 27 other states throughout our great nation by growing black market, illegal, unregulated cannabis slated for the black market throughout the entire country. And the worst part about it is they use these EPA-banned toxic poisons, trade name carbofuran, metafos, qufuran. There's a bunch of different derivatives, but essentially an insecticide, rodenticide that is so toxic and such a highly deadly, hazardous material. It was banned in America from being used 20 years ago by the EPA. And these cartels still import it from south of the border. Excuse me, because it can still be used throughout third world countries. And this stuff is on the plants. It's on the bud product that unsuspecting, purchasers and users of cannabis on the black market, whether they be kids, experimenting, medicinal patients, adult users, all over the Midwest, all over the Eastern Seaboard, are ingesting this stuff without knowing these poisons are on it and definitely affecting their bodies slowly, but definitely damaging them. So that's why we got involved. And in 30 years of being a game warden and really specializing in this, the last 15 years of my career, I had never seen a more egregious environmental criminal than these cartels. And now, I'm in the process of filming not only the Call Sign Trailblazer documentary that's a production about my life, my backstory, personal, professional, but more importantly, the issues going on now of what the landscape has changed into throughout California and the rest of the country. And now we're not just dealing with drug cartels, Mexican cartels, we're dealing with the organized Asian transnational criminal organizations, the Hmongs, the Chinese, and other groups that are now doing unregulated cannabis production on private land in all throughout California and other states, and doing just as much, if not more, environmental damage when it comes to things like water stealing and digging illegal wells and still putting banned toxics or even, legal pesticides on plants that are still not organic. And again, all that's going into this massive cannabis black market back where you guys are and all over Midwest and the Eastern Seaboard. So the problem has actually gotten worse rather than better since we regulated cannabis recreationally and tightened up medicinal laws in 2016. And now we're 5 years into Prop 64 passing, and California being kind of the weed state of the country and one of only 6 true Mediterranean climates on the globe, just like we are the wine state for growing great wine grapes, right? The Napa Valley wine legend and the good vineyards we have. We are a really good growing cannabis state. And sadly, as other states look to regulate and other countries even reach out to me to look to regulate, and they look at the massive amounts of water stealing, the golden state of California right now is in their second largest drought in over a century. We saw this happen over the last 10-year period when I was operational running the marijuana enforcement team, the specialized tactical unit. We formed up in 2013. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife formed up simply to fight the drug cartel problem, trespass growers, and focus just on that because it was so bad. And now here we are in our second century-wide drought in the Golden State of California. And gentlemen, no exaggeration, I was just down there co-hosting a second documentary. A good friend of mine, Jorge Ventura, is putting together for the Daily Caller and getting interviewed for it and doing operational site visits with the Sheriff's Department of Siskiyou County. And I mean, in the 3 years since I retired from operations in 2018, it has become a train wreck. What I saw in Northern California, I was back in it again, having flashbacks, but in a different environment, working more of the Asian cartel, transnational groups in Northern California. And it's absolutely a mess. Millions and millions upon billions of gallons of water being stolen over, short periods of time throughout that state, because unfortunately it's not that we regulated cannabis in California, it's how we regulated cannabis and how poorly we regulated cannabis and are currently poorly regulating cannabis in the Golden State that's making and incentivizing the black market to thrive.
So how is it impacting water throughout the state? I mean, they're diverting it, but what are the impacts sort of downstream?
Yeah, a couple things happen, Joe. That's a great question, because when you look at the drug cartels, say the Mexican drug cartels, they are affecting watersheds that start at the headwaters. So basically, take like where I was last week, right below Mount Shasta, a 14,100 and some change foot peak, one of the 7 most magnificent mountains in the world, covered in snow in the spring thaw right now. And that entire peak of Mount Shasta is going to thaw, right? And that's the most pristine water of headwaters, what we call our spring thaw. And just like in my home state of Montana now, our Cabinet Mountains, they thaw out. And all of this pristine water starts in these creeks to work its way down into lakes, down into cities, down into water treatment plants for water consumption, for water use, for agriculture, whatever the case may be. And what's happening from the Mexican cartel side is their grow sites are usually in the most dangerous water impacting areas, because they start at literally the headwaters of where these streams are thawing out and flowing this fresh, clean water down into the valleys. And what they're doing is they start to divert that water right at its source before it can make it down to lakes, before it can make it down to us. They divert it, they poison it with the carbofuran. It's being used up by the plants. So aquatics like fish, big game, small game, wildlife species. And we as humans are all impacted by that, because not only are they depleting the water, but they're also environmentally destroying it. They're poisoning it. So now we have a poisoning issue, water that's not viable. And now again, taking the drought example that we have with California right now, the whole entire state of California is on drought restrictions and monitored water use from legitimate users. Farmers right now in Siskiyou County, what we saw last week, are literally not able to water their alfalfa crops. They're not able to water their cattle, their sheep, their stock, because their underground aquifers have been so tapped by illegal cannabis growers drilling illegal wells and using tons and tons and millions of gallons of stolen water. It's affecting American industry. It's affecting American way of life with agriculture, with cattle raising, our meat sources, things like that. So that's the problem there. And then on the cartel side, Mexican cartel side, then we come over to these groups we were working last week, and it's literally not only taking the surface water, which, in an example of a drought state like California, most of the blue line annual streams are pretty much dried out in most areas of California, simply because we're in this drought. Now they're going to underground water, gentlemen. They're digging illegal wells, and they're drilling deeper and deeper and deeper, having to take basically underground water in our aquifer, right, our water table, and deplete that to a point. So you have the surface water issues for wildlife and for streams, and everything that's going on for the aquatics and wildlife, and then you have the underground water that's affecting cattle, livestock, drinking water for cities. That's where the double impact is just an absolute wreck.
So basically, American agriculture consumers are being impacted across the entire nation because of this. On some level, it's a hyper local issue, but it has nationwide implications for, food, just agriculture as a whole. But based on your book, it talked a bit about how it's impacting things like the steelhead fisheries and everything like that. Is it also hurting California's economy from sort of a tourism perspective?
Well, it most certainly is, and the problem is when we're on drought restrictions in my old home state of California, and yet illegal black market cannabis growing criminals are sucking so much water dry, and they're not under any water restrictions. They're just taking it. They're actually stealing it from schools. They're taking it from people's water tanks in Northern California. They're tapping into fire hydrants and city water pipes in water trucks in the middle of the night, and taking 4 or 5 6,000 gallons constantly through these trucks just to go into growing illegal cannabis. So yeah, the the impacts are significant. We don't even know what those lasting impacts are right now. We're going to see more of them as this spring and then this summer progresses. The last couple of years, all over the West Coast and the Northwest, not only here in Montana but also back in California and everywhere in between, was the extreme fire danger and the wildfires that were happening with super hot temperatures and absolutely ideal powder keg conditions in most of our forests. And California got hit the hardest that I have ever seen, in my life, 54 years of growing up and really loving and still trying to protect everything that matters in the Golden State. And when we have that powder keg of dry conditions, a lot of fuel for fires in our forests, and we just have a water table that's so depleted, you guys can kind of do the math on how bad that can be for fire danger as well. So all these things factor in. The thing we need to remember is we have the legitimate cannabis industry in California as an example, and we have a percentage of growers that are doing it correctly. They are conserving water. They are regulated. They're monitoring their water very carefully. They're using water from legitimate sources. They're not depleting wells or draining the aquifer, and they're actually on our side of the fight. They flat out, have termed the marijuana enforcement team that I co-founded and led between 2013 and 2018. And, make no mistake, that tactical unit is still out every day of the year doing something. And they're about to go into another, massive grow season and continue to work the trespass illegal cartel grows, whether they be Mexican based or the other groups. But the bottom line is that it's just not going to get better as we've, unfortunately structured regulation in California until we put the bite back into illegal cannabis production and show that the legitimate industry is doing it by the numbers and that the black market industry is just taking advantage of a very unincentivized black market. This problem is going to continue. It's not going to go away.
So I just sort of building on all of that, what has been the impact on protected and endangered species with all of this?
Well, it goes all the way back. My good friends, Dr. Murad Gabriel and Greta Weigert, that run and started an organization called Integral Ecology Research Center, IERC. They were based out of UC Davis. They're all over Northern California. Dr. Gabriel is now a U.S. Forest Service biologist working hand in hand with U.S. Forest Service now on all of their outdoor trespass grow raids and, getting soil samples, getting water samples, looking at the cumulative impacts of these banned and also legal but very dangerous poisons and environmentally destructive poisons in grow sites. And what IERC started doing way back over 10 years ago that really got national attention was those two scientists work on the Pacific fisher, which is a small mammal, looks kind of like a marmot. It's all over the California forest, or it was in pretty good quantity. And just because of cartel grows on public land like the national forests all over California, this little guy was almost extinct. I mean, it went from threatened to almost extinct to a handful of them left. And when that when that story kind of got out nationally, we finally got a little bit of attention to this issue. We didn't name my second book Hidden War, which is, Joe, and I appreciate you diving in and reaching out and reading the content. We didn't name it Hidden War for anything. We feel that this issue is a national, should be a national attention issue because it's not just affecting California, it's affecting all the other states as other states start to regulate. And then if they don't regulate correctly, they're going to incentivize a black market. And we're seeing these other groups going in and stealing water, setting up trespass grows, setting up, illegal private land grows in Oklahoma and other Midwestern states because they're kind of following the suit of what we did out on the West Coast. But when we see animals like the Pacific fisher, I show a pretty graphic PowerPoint, and there's several pictures, as Joe, in Hidden War in color that show cartel growers spraying, unprotected with no personal protection equipment. They're spraying a 3 to 5 gallon backpack sprayer with a ton of carbofuran in it, the EPA banned toxic, diluted with only 3 to 5 gallons of water in this backpack sprayer, when that bottle was intended to be diluted with 4 to 5 to 6,000 gallons of water. And even with that dilution factor, EPA still found that that was too toxic for American consumers and banned it. So these guys have this Molotov cocktail of just completely hazardous material poison. They're spraying all over these marijuana plants. And then you're getting golden eagles, you're getting gray fox, ingesting this stuff or getting contaminated by it the second they fly into a grow site, and they're dead within minutes on the ground. And as you know, we have pictures in the book of, again, trespass cartel growers holding up a golden eagle or posing with a dead bear or a deer that was killed by the poisons in their grow is kind of a trophy. Like, I got this animal before it got my multi-million-dollar black market cash crop. And that's just unacceptable on American soil. Obviously, like you guys and like all of us in America that are proud of our country, that want to have open spaces and clean water for our kids and our grandkids and the next generation to see what a black-tailed deer or a mule deer looks like, what a steelhead trout looks like going through a creek, what all these beautiful animals in these pristine areas that, don't only have wildlife and habitat value, they have a whole lot of mental health value for the American public. And I want to go back, gentlemen, to what we just experienced through COVID lockdowns when the pandemic dropped. Everybody was on lockdowns. Nobody could really, get outside right away. Everybody was kind of, in a very fearful mode of mindset, frame of reference of what this pandemic really meant. And if it hadn't been for the great outdoors, public hiking trails, getting on lakes and creeks and rivers to fish, or just breathe fresh air, or get into the backcountry to get a little bit of hope and kind of recharge your batteries, if you will, with the great beauty of Mother Nature, it would have been a lot worse for so many people that went through so much trauma through these last 2 years of the pandemic. If we lose what little open spaces we have and the pristine wildlife, waterways, and wild lands throughout America, and make no mistake, we are losing them at an alarming rate, not only from, illegal cannabis, but, development, other factors that impact these open spaces. And that's where this issue kind of compounds itself. And people think of California and they think of LA and the San Francisco, urban sprawls, and they just don't really think of California being an amazing mountain and desert and coastal state. And it is a beautiful resource state. And I saw it last week in the Mount Shasta area again, but I saw it absolutely being decimated environmentally by these illegal growers. And, and we've been regulating for 5 years, and allegedly that was all supposed to end when we regulated under Prop 64. But as we've seen, it has not ended. It has increased of a problem. And now we just got to look at the rest of the country and hope that we can turn back the tide and make good choices when it comes to policy, when it comes to regulation and enforcement, and when it comes to really differentiating between the legitimate cannabis industry doing it correctly and then these illegal cannabis growers that are absolutely the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, what's the impetus there? I mean, so you've described this problem where we've got people coming to California illegally, right? Setting up shop illegally, bringing toxic, illegal chemicals with them that have impacts on the natural resources in California, right, but also across the country. What's the impetus for them there? Is it purely financial? Is that what they're getting out of it? And what's the alternative for California mitigating that through legal means of providing ways for people to grow cannabis legally under the law?
Yeah, both great questions. And I'll take on the first one. And yes, the reason these transnational criminal organizations are coming out to the West Coast and to the Golden State is strictly for financial gain. What we saw last week, and we've known, and I've known, and my teammates, going back 20 years, we've known what the drug cartels out of Mexico are doing, and it is financial gain. And we want to remember, I'm going to talk about that cartel group first. These groups not only grow trespass cannabis for the black market all over the country, or that's slated to go to the entire black market throughout America, but they're also into methamphetamine production, synthetic fentanyl, that, as we all know, is killing thousands, if not more, kids and adults all over the country. The counterfeit prescription opioids that they're making that look like a legitimate prescription painkiller, and every third pill kills you in 5-10 minutes. We're seeing that happen to middle American kids. I actually have a friend that just lost their daughter who, was a Silicon Valley up and coming excellent student, ready to go to college, had a painkiller pill that was one of these dirty pills from a Mexican lab somewhere in the affluent tech capital of the world, Silicon Valley, and was found dead the next morning in her bedroom. Absolutely heartbreaking. Though these same cartels that are doing cannabis are doing that. And what's really the hot button item now, and I'm so happy to see it getting the attention it deserves, is the human and child sex trafficking also being run by these cartel groups as another part of their business model, if you will. So we have all of that embedded in America with these drug cartels doing other things besides the drugs, with the human trafficking, as I just mentioned. But because there's so much money on the black market for all of those crimes, including unregulated cannabis, trespass cannabis is an example. But now we look at the organized groups that we saw last week in Northern California, and they're coming out of Wisconsin, Minnesota, other parts of the country as a criminal network being put in place, picking an area like Northern California. Siskiyou County is an example. That is a massive, massive county. It's one of the most pristine counties and mountainous counties, from Mount Shasta north all the way to Doris and the Oregon border. And that particular county is not only loaded with wildlife resource, it is one of the most impacted counties now in California, with these transnational groups coming in strictly to grow unregulated cannabis for the black market. And now California has regulated cannabis. Siskiyou County at the county level decided, no, we're not going to allow that at the county. We're going to supersede state law. And because they're just so spread out and they have so few resources and so little law enforcement presence, and they're so taxed, the criminal organizations know it. And they know that at best, if they get raided, they're going to lose their plants. They're probably not going to get prosecuted. It's a misdemeanor and a $500 fine to grow more than 10 plants, let's say, in that county for personal use. But to grow 7,000 plants for the black market, that's going to make millions and millions of dollars on the black market, same crime. So there's no deterrence right now as the law is structured. And what I'm speaking towards, and what many people in this industry that are so passionate about, protecting and preserving our wildlife, waterways, and wildlands throughout America, and especially our public safety. Nobody wants to see anybody ingesting poison cannabis on the regulated market and on the consumer level. Legitimate growers don't want that. They are DEM certified, which basically means they're organically, purely certified, inspected, at the highest level, kind of like a high Michelin rating for a fine restaurant. That's one thing going on at a very small percentage, but it's all of this other toxically tainted poisons and pesticides on this cannabis that's going out everywhere. And it's just making these criminal groups millions and millions, if not billions of dollars at the expense of decimating the wildlife, wildlands, and waterway resources we have in the Golden State as an example. And certainly the violence that goes with these grows guys, growers shooting at each other, threatening landowners, threatening farmers and ranchers, that, hey, telling them, we're going to take your water, don't make a stint about it, or basically you're going to get killed. That is not an exaggeration. I saw that firsthand in Siskiyou County last week. We've got a documentary upcoming, 2 of them, that are going to highlight some of that. And it's just something that has to change, and we need to look at it nationally, not just as a state by state basis, but look at it nationally to correct the problem, I think.
So you mentioned that during the pandemic, people went out into nature a whole lot more. And I mean, I'm on board with that. I wound up moving to West Virginia for the pandemic.
There you go, Joe.
I had my own little outdoor adventures, became a hunter, the whole 9 yards. But yeah, a lot of people spent a lot of time out in nature. National parks saw their highest attendance pretty much ever. How much are people interacting with these growers when they go off the beaten path, and how is it sort of threatening innocent lives?
Yeah, another great question. And yes, sometimes they are running into these growers. We've had, and it's the people that really like to get out and get off the beaten path, off the main trail. Like you said, find a pristine waterway that you want to, catch a fish in, or get your niece, your nephew, your kid, your grandkid into their first fishing experience, say on a remote stream that's open to legal fishing and regulated properly, or a hunter that's going out, to get their first deer for food, whether it's a father and daughter. We've actually had that happen in California, where unfortunately people off the beaten path do run into these grow sites. Right now, on the private land issue, if they're near a creek, but they happen to be close to a private land grow site and a hoop house or greenhouse and they get too close, they might be detected on a camera. Some of these groups we have in Northern California have security systems, and they basically have armed growers just waiting at the fence line, if you will, to make sure people aren't seeing what they're doing illegally and threatening them. So we have had people shot at before. Fortunately, it does not happen all the time. But one of the biggest informants, if you will, of turning in some of these illegal cannabis groups, and the very dangerous ones, are hunters and our anglers. Especially, I'll use California as an example. Our CalTip 1-800-Turn-In-A-Poacher program, which used to be primarily, hunting and fishing enforcement, people poaching animals, taking too many deer, taking fish or over limits of fish, or killing stuff out of season, let's say. Those reports on our CalTip line have kind of transferred over to, hey, I've got this illegal stream diversion from this grower, and I heard gunshots last night, and I don't know what's going on next door, and I can't let my kids go out and play, and there's people threatening us at our gate and threatening to take our water. I mean, it's some serious crazy stuff going on. So there are people interacting with them, not only in the deep forests, but also in just these rural tracts where you have these private land illegal grows going on, and you kind of have the Wild West out there, turf wars and everything else. And that is not an exaggeration. And that's because that's basically getting worse and worse every year after the Prop 64 passed in 2016. And we started to see this change happen when I was still operational from 2016 to 2018, gentlemen. I retired from operations, completed my career operationally at the end of 2018. And now we've had 3 more years. And so something we are going to do with the second edition of Hidden War is go into news stories and go into some trends post-COVID and everything else that's happened, and what's not working right, and what we feel needs to change to make things work right. But that has been a very big threat for the American public out there if they run across one of these grow sites. Joe, to your point, one of the things we saw as a positive out of COVID, and the pandemic and everything this country has gone through, from civil unrest to complete divisiveness, polarization politically and frame of reference. And it's just so horrible to see, when I think we need more unity, not only as a country, but for humanity right now, with all the negativity we've seen. And the one positive thing that came out of COVID is, because so many people were on lockdown and everybody started going into the outdoors just to get their heads right, just to get their mental health back, and get that power and that healing and that inspiration in life from Mother Nature, was an increase in hunting and fishing license sales, a massive increase in the number of people becoming conservationists that were typically anti-gun, anti-hunting, and they realized, I may need to hunt for my family because this supply chain might not be here forever. I'm seeing the writing on the walls. I might be calling 911 and knowing I'm not going to have help if I have a dangerous threat or somebody threatening me, knowing that basically there's nobody out there to protect some innocent Americans. So we saw a 30 to 40% increase in the number of online hunter education certification courses right after the pandemic dropped a year and a half ago, March, April, May. That middle of the year was an absolute surge in people becoming conservationists, people buying and learning and training on firearms for legitimate protection and possibly subsistence, having to hunt reasons, and just being a little more self-reliant. And I think if we haven't learned anything throughout this pandemic and the geopolitical climate of the world right now, is we have to be able to rely on ourselves, whether we're in an urban environment or we live in the mountains of Montana, wherever in between we are, we have to be more self-reliant. And I think that mindset really kind of put everybody into a little more open-mindedness of why we hunt, how we protect animals through the legitimate conservation process, and what we're going to need to do moving forward, because we have a lot of challenges as a country and right now across the world with all the madness going on.
So one of the things that really struck me at the very end of the book, you had some charts and graphs, and one of them was how many wildlife conservation officers there were in each state.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It blew my mind. Like
Right.
I said, I moved out to West Virginia. They have at the time the book was published, 128 wildlife officers. And since then, the number has gone down due to retirements and everything else.
Right.
But they're really essentially enforcing these laws on just huge amounts of property. In many states, equal to just the actual jurisdiction is enormous. What is sort of going on in that particular sphere? How does a typical wildlife officer operate in order to actually cover this area and prevent these crimes?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up, Joe, because you've heard me say this. You see it in the book. I talked about it a lot in the book, and really, it's kind of part of my outreach mantra right now is the thin green line. What is that thin green line? And traditionally, the thin green line for us game wardens is police officers on the thin blue line, and military border protection rangers and game wardens on quote unquote the thin green line. We as game wardens are fighting to preserve and protect our wildlife resources, our public safety, our waterways, on the thin green line throughout America. And right now, because like you said, there are so few game wardens for these massive tracts of land. And I'm going to take my old state of California as an example. We have, I think, roughly over 500 officers in the field or operational and sworn, law enforcement officers as game wardens in California. And that's an approximation. And 100 plus of those now are dedicated just to unregulated cannabis enforcement, either on private lands or the tactical unit, the marijuana enforcement team, and my brothers out there for the outdoor trespass, mostly cartel-based grows. That's 1/5 to 1/4 of the entire force dealing with the cannabis issue, but all that other stuff we got to deal with didn't go away, right? People taking too many animals, commercial wildlife, internet wildlife trafficking, streambed alteration, marine patrol, and offshore issues, to just name a few. And all the states have that problem. And we're a fairly progressive, very well-funded state, say in California and Florida and Texas. I look at some of the bigger, progressive agencies that have, fortunately, resources to diversify. But I look at my friends and brothers and sisters on the thin green line of like South Dakota and Wisconsin, and just spoke at their conferences recently. And, they have 80 to 100 officers statewide. And they're doing everything that we just mentioned on the traditional side. And now they're getting cartel cannabis, and now they're getting transnational groups in their states doing that problem. So the game warden job has not only increased in challenge, has increased in danger, but now we're doing it with just as many officers or even less than we had, say, 5 years ago. We're having to deal with things like medical response, civil unrest, because in these small towns, we got to remember that game wardens don't just do game warden work. We're highly trained, we're individuals, we work on our own, but we're trained to do everything police officers do as well. So we're going to get called into an active shooter. We're going to get called into a civil unrest protest if things get crazy. We're going to get called into any medical response for public safety for the good of our communities, say in a COVID lockdown or a pandemic. So what does that do in the outdoors? It just depletes resources. It repeats the sheepdogs from being out there when the wolves are out there preying on not only our public safety, but also our wildlife resources. And through COVID, I saw this. I saw this in Montana. And when I was back in California, Forest Service gates cut, people going into areas doing whatever they wanted, destroying property, vandalizing, killing, overabundance of poaching, things just like that. And I saw that in the national forests and the public lands that I'm always in up here in Montana. And I saw it back home in California because we were so tied up with everything going on with this pandemic. So again, that thin green line, guys, as we call it, has gotten even thinner. And right now, like I've said on many podcasts, and Joe Rogan especially, when getting on Joe's show and making him aware of this, we gained an ally that was in a traditional world of cannabis regulation and pro on that, and also a conservationist, and saying, I had no idea this was so bad in the woods. And there were game wardens fighting the drug cartels in my old home state of California. I'm now part of the thin green line, and every American should be as well. And it doesn't just have to be a law enforcement thing, guys. It's you guys are part of that thin green line just by having me on. And I'm so grateful that we get to talk about this issue, so all of our American viewers that are coming together for the sake of America can understand what's going on out there and spread the word. Look at policy very carefully when cannabis regulation comes to your town, because it's going to come. Read the fine print. Make sure you understand what we are enacting and what policies we are generating that are not going to have a positive impact on our wildlife resources, and they're not going to help protect public safety if they're not engineered correctly.
Awesome.
Just as a kind of personal note, a look into your perspective on this. Why are you personally so passionate about protecting wildlife? I mean, I know you're a game warden, right? That's literally what you do or you used to be a game warden. That's what you did for your job. but what about, right, the destruction of the natural resources? What about the toxic chemicals? Why does that bother you in particular? What makes you tick when you go out to talk, when you go to do documentaries on this issue? What's in your mind? What's the MO there?
The bottom line is I just love the outdoors. I think Mother Nature is one of the biggest, if not the biggest blessing we have left, just because of everything that's happened in our country and throughout the world. I grew up in a conservation family, gentlemen. My mom and dad hunted and fished. They were competitive shotgun shooters. My dad was a backup to the Olympic team for trap and skeet. So I was actually raised in a pro-gun environment, responsible, ethical, proper use of a firearm is a very, delicate tool to be used appropriately with respect and with training and with safety protocol. And I just always really, I think, got my most joy out of being in the woods, whether I was hiking, trail running, fishing, backpacking, whatever the case may be. And started to love wildlife early on because I was raised that way. And then, of course, when I met that game warden, like I talk about in the first book, and that experience changed my life, and I changed my major in college at San Jose State, went from an engineering degree, program that I was in and lucky to be in, and realizing that was not the direction, that wasn't my calling, and changed immediately my first year of school to criminal justice so I could be a game warden, because I knew right then, my dad's saying before he passed in 2013, and he raised me under that mantra. And I had some of my best experiences, obviously, in the outdoors were with my father and my uncles that were really my mentors, my woods ninjas, if you will, to really train me properly out there. Is the woods are my church, and that was my dad's mantra. And it's become my mantra as well, because I think there's so much healing in Mother Nature, in the great outdoors. And I think if we lose any more of that, and we continue to lose that in America, I think we're losing a big part of our country and our humanity. And I think about America and our forefathers. I think about Teddy Roosevelt, Aldo Leopold, and John Muir, and all of our conservation forefathers that really made it their mission, their passion, to lock up some lands, to make some national forests, to allow use in national forests for hunting, for fishing, for just wildlife enjoyment, for all of America to enjoy. And I realize how much this is impacted and how much it's being threatened right now. And I mean, I really consider California ground zero of this train wreck. And being a Californian and loving California today with friends and family and resource, it's just in my blood, and I can't stop trying to protect everything for the sake of this nation and really conservation worldwide, because now it's, they say the pen is mightier than the sword. And I had a really blessed career, a really crazy, challenging and dangerous operational career, especially in the special operations realm, with the marijuana enforcement team and all that we were doing then, and all that my brothers and sisters back at home are still doing and risking their lives daily. But now I get to tell the issue freely and honestly. I get to meet people and look at this thing as a national issue, not just a California issue. And, retirement is anything but. I call this phase 2. I feel like I'm, as busy as I was running the marijuana enforcement team, but in a different way. And it's doing things like we're doing today, gentlemen, is being able to just talk with like-minded Americans that care about their country, that want to bring people together. We want to get rid of the divisiveness. We want to be able to accept each other's different views, but come together for a greater good. And when we look at wildlife, which I love about our wildlife outdoor resources, is it doesn't matter if you're hard left, hard right. It doesn't matter if you're a preservationist and an animal rights lover and never want to see them taken, don't want to be a hunter, or you're a diehard conservationist and want to do ethical, legal hunting. The one thing we all agree on is we don't want these criminal elements in our great nation destroying not only our public and our kids with these illegal drugs, these, the lab drugs and everything I talked about earlier, but also destroying our wildlife, wildlands, and waterways, which trespass cannabis is one example. And then knowing that if they're going to walk out in the forest one day, they may not see any wildlife because it's been destroyed, and or they might get ambushed because they stumble upon a multi-million-dollar black market criminal organization that cannot have any witnesses. So that's why I'm so passionate. And that's why I'm finding, in the 3 years since I've retired from operations, I'm finding a resurgence of American patriotism through protecting wildlife and protecting those resources, because now we're trying to make that hidden war a little less hidden. We're trying to make it an overt priority issue, just like anything else we would face in this nation, because this isn't happening overseas. This isn't happening south of our border. This is happening within America. These groups are embedded in America and raping our resources without, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, and threatening our public safety and eroding us from within. And if we don't take that on as a priority nationally and stop it, we're going to lose it all. And I don't want to see that in my lifetime. And I especially don't want to see, the next generation of the upcoming youth that need to understand how beautiful the outdoors are for their benefit as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for being on the podcast. And it was great talking to you. And one more plug for the book.
I could just say, guys, if anybody wants to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me on my website. It's www.johnnorris.com, JOHNNORES. Definitely follow me on Instagram and Facebook, because in the social media age, Joe, you guys know, people go to social media before they go to websites and learn where to get this information. And on Instagram, I'm just at John Norris, JOHNNORES. Same thing on Facebook. We are wrapping up. This is the last phase of the first edition hardcover of Hidden War. They can order off of Amazon. There's a hardcover, as you guys know. And Joe, I think that's the one you read. But I also read for the Audible with a great Billboard artist, record producer, and audiobook producer in Atlanta, who scored it originally, put sound effects in, and did a fantastic job of doing the Audible for Hidden War, as well as the Kindle. You can also get copies of my first book on Amazon, War in the Woods. And if you want to reach out to me through my website, go to my email, which is trailblazer413@yahoo.com, trailblazer413@yahoo.com, or direct message me through any social media platform. I do personalized book copies for people that want a personalized kit, also with my signature knife, the V-Knives Trailblazer blade. We've got a lot of stuff around the Thin Green Line, and those funds also go to protecting wildlife through different organizations. So I really appreciate you guys having me on. I love what you're doing. I hope to talk to you again. And certainly anybody listening, thanks for participating and taking some awareness. And you guys are all part of our Thin Green Line, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, John. Take care.
There, hold on.